Hello, Advanced Social Psychology students, and welcome to Unit 3, Module 11, Chapter 10, Working Groups, Performance and Group Decision Making, Part 2. Okay, let's get to the slides for Chapter 10. And if you just finished watching Part 1, you'll see that I've kind of backed up just a couple slides. So in the end, at the end of part 1 of this video, we were talking about how to understand group performance. There's really two pieces that you need to know. One piece is that you have to understand the effect of the presence of others on people's performance. Just having people there ends up impacting their performance. So when you're working in a group, people can see how you're performing, and that in and of itself ends up affecting your performance. And we talked about that last time. We talked about how sometimes the presence of others helps performance, sometimes it hurts performance. And we talked about science's drive theory of social facilitation. And okay, but now let's get to the second piece of this. So the first piece is the presence of others can affect your performance. But now there's another piece that says, in addition to the fact that people are watching you, there's also a whole bunch of other stuff that you have to do with them. You have to coordinate with them. You have to figure out who's going to, usually or oftentimes there's either someone who's given the role of leadership or there's a leader that emerges. What are the network? How are we going to talk with one another? What are the policies and procedures that we're going to use? There's so many different factors that affect how the group works together, in addition to the fact that you're working in the presence of other people. And there are so many factors that we could look at. It's insane. Like, I'm tempted to say there are a million, and then I'd say, oh, I'm probably exaggerating, but I don't know that I am. The books that are written, there's a big model that I really like that just on the page has about 30 different characteristics that end up affecting performance. And all of those interact with one another. So if 2 are high and the other, 28 of them are low, then you'd have it be one way. If it's just unbelievably complex. So in a course, what can we cover, especially when we only have one chapter on this? Like, what can we talk about? This isn't a whole course in groups. And by far, the number one thing that has more of an impact than anything else is the type of task. And so your book identifies a bunch of different task types. One is a unitary task. And there are some tasks that cannot be divided up. It can't be that people work on it separately at the same time. And so these are unitary tasks where the whole group has to work together in order to get this done all at the same time. I think of some of the pieces of equipment out of Goodyear. We're here in Lawton Fort Sill. Goodyear is a big plant, and there are machines where there are 2 or 3 men and women working on the machine together. And if one of them isn't there, you can't run the machine. You need everyone to be there at the same time. They're all doing different things, but it's impossible to divide this task up and work on it separately. That's a unitary task. Other tasks can be sort of divided up, and how you piecemeal them back together or how the rewards are decided will determine what type of tasks they are. So there are additive tasks. These are tasks where the group performance is equal to the sum of the individual performances. Think of a tug of war. How much pressure is my group going to exert on this rope? It's going to be how much effort I do and the person behind me and the person behind them and the person behind them. And you add that up, and that's how much pressure is going to go on here. Another additive task is, let's say I owned a real estate firm. How many houses did our firm sell? Well, how many did the one realtor sell? Plus how many the second realtor sold? Plus how many the third? Plus how many the fourth? That's how many we sold. So an additive task, the whole group does as well as the sum of each of the individual members. But sometimes that's not how the rewards work. On a conjunctive task, the whole group does as well as its least performing or worst performing group member. So think about a convoy of ships. The entire group of ships has to go at the speed of the slowest ship. Does that make sense? When my kids and when our family used to go to the Wichita Mountains here, we're in Lawton, Fort Sill, and there's beautiful mountain range. It's just beautiful. They're not high mountains, but they're some of the oldest in the world, or at least in the United States. And so it's just beautiful. But when we would go hiking there, the whole family hiked at the pace of whoever was the slowest. So when it was just my daughter, we went at her speed. When I had my son 5 years later, then we went at his speed. And then, I don't know, around the time he turned 12 or so, we all started going at my speed. Didn't really like that. But you get the idea that the whole group is moving at the speed of the worst performing member, the slowest member. Those are conjunctive tasks. Sometimes people view the world or our society as a big conjunctive task. And they say our whole society can only move at the speed of our weakest members. And if you believe this to be the case, then you're going to put a lot of time and money and resources, community resources, to really trying to get our members that are having the most difficulty to proceed and advance and do well. Certainly the fact that we had the Oklahoma bombing, and at least at this point, it seems to have been done by one person working alone. So here we had a weakest link who subjected, hundreds, thousands of people to some intense, long-term, life-changing suffering. What could we have done if he had had a mental health issue? What could we have done to help him if he was getting some ideas that were not helpful to the group? What kind of education could we have done to switch that around? So that's a conjunctive task. We have the opposite of it, the disjunctive tasks. The disjunctive tasks are when the whole group's performance is equal to the performance of the best performing member. So think about, like, if you're playing Trivial Pursuit, all you need is one person on your group, one person on your team to know the correct answer, and your whole team wins. Your whole group gets that one correct. A lot of the bowls, like the college bowls for a science or math, all you need is one team member to get it right, and the whole group gets it right. And some people believe that our society is better thought of as a disjunctive task, that the whole society, the whole community moves at the pace of its best members. To some extent, I believe that this is how we feel in the United States. We pick our best athletes and we have them not even go to school or get privately tutored as they prepare for the Olympics. We have our brightest people and we put them in advanced classes and try to give them all extra help so they can proceed quicker, gifted and talented programs and such, so that they'll proceed through everything quicker, and put them together so that they can help spur one another on. And so we're acting as though the performance, the whole group's performance, is equal to the performance of the best performing members. That's a disjunctive task. And there are compensatory tasks. So this is when the group performance is equal to the average of the individual performances. These tend to be tasks that are more like opinions and such, because you might be going, what's the difference between a compensatory task and an additive task? An additive task, you add it up. Compensatory task, you add it up and divide it by the number of people in the group. So compensatory task could be something like, how happy are you with the President of the United States right now on a scale of 1 to 7? Well, if I add up the four, if there's a group of 4, if I add up the 4 people's numbers, I'm going to end up with a number that won't make sense. I need to divide it by the 4 group members so that the scale stays on that 1 to 7 scale. Okay. So these are the different types of tasks we have. And depending upon those different types of tasks, it might be better to work alone or better to work with other people. So for example, on a unitary task, you can't work alone on it. So it's not even an option. So you have to work together. So working together is going to be better than working alone. You can't do it at all if you work alone. Let's go from the bottom up here, though. For a compensatory task, the research shows that groups tend to do better than individuals. Groups in a group, usually someone who has a very whacked out idea or is very different from everyone else, in the group, they'll get buffered down some. So the groups tend to do better than individuals. In disjunctive tasks, clearly groups are going to do better than individuals because all you need is one person to get it right and the whole group gets it right. However, in a conjunctive task, individuals are going to do better than groups because the whole group sort of can only go as well as its worst performing member. So most of the group members are holding back. So we would have done better had we been individuals. Now, additive tasks should be definitely, the groups should be doing better than the individuals because in a group, you get to add up everyone's performance. Individually, they're alone. So obviously groups should do better. But we have this weird thing that goes on. Sometimes, or most of the time when people are in groups, you can find that they don't work as hard. We call it social loafing. So social loafing is this phenomenon that people work less hard, they exert less effort when they're working in a group rather than when they're working alone. And yes, here's just another slide that says the same thing. Groups outperform individuals on additive and compensatory tasks, or at least they should on additive tasks. Groups perform well on disjunctive tasks if the group includes at least one individual who knows the correct solution, right? And groups rarely perform better than the best member. That doesn't happen. Why? Perhaps, and we know that groups perform poorly on conjunctive tasks. Why do groups perform worse than individuals on an additive task? Part of it, like we said, is a reduction of effort with social loafing. We'll talk about that in a minute. But also, oftentimes, there's coordination losses. And you can see in this graph, this is how many people are in the group. When we go to a dyad, there's already some coordination loss. But as there are more and more group members, the coordination loss just gets bigger and bigger and bigger compared to people working alone and then combining their output. That's what a pseudo group is. In addition, though, I want to talk about social loafing now. Well, before I talk about getting rid of it, let me talk about what it is. So social loafing is this phenomenon that people work less hard, they exert less effort when they're working in a group than when they're alone. And Latané was one of the first researchers and his colleagues to study this. And he has this classic experiment that everyone talks about. It's a cheering experiment. They were pseudo groups. You were brought into a room alone and you had a big microphone there and they gave you headphones and they asked you to cheer and scream as loud as you could, as though you were cheering for a sports team, okay? And they thought this was a good task to have people do because it's based purely on effort. And sometimes when you went into the room to cheer, they'd say, you're going to be the only one cheering. However, we're going to have you listen to other people cheer because it would be awkward to just be in a room cheering all by yourself. So you're going to get to listen to other people. But when we're recording you, you are the only one that we're recording. So you're all alone. Does that make sense? Then they come back another day and they're all done in different orders. You know, they had to counterbalance for order. But you'd come and you'd be told you're in a group of size 3. You're alone in the room and you're going to be able to listen to other people cheer. But the output you're giving us is going to be combined with the output of 2 other people who are in other rooms just like this also cheering. And then come back again, and now you're with a group of 6. So again, you're alone in a room listening to people cheer, but we're going to combine your output with that of 5 other people. And each person gets a different order. Some are alone, then 3, then 6. Some are alone, then 6, then 3. Some are 3, then alone, then 6, and so on and so on. It's all counterbalanced. And what they found was that when people thought there were 3 people in the group. In other words, the output was going to be combined with 2 others. They cheered about 2/3 as loud as they did when they thought they were alone. And when they thought that they were cheering with, that their output was going to be combined with 5 other people, in other words, they're in a group of 6, they cheered only 1/3 as loud as they did when they thought they were alone. So people work less hard when they think there's people working with them. And the more people that they think that are with them, the more they socially loaf, the less hard they work. And so this is kind of a little depressing. But what can you do to reduce social loafing? So let's say you're a manager, you have to have people work together, you think this is important. It is an additive task. So you know that social loafing could potentially play a role here. What can you do to make this as little of a problem as possible? And the research is clear that people do not socially loaf nearly as much if their individual contributions are identifiable. So when that in that experiment of Latinase, when they said that your output is being combined with those of the other people, they knew that their output wasn't identifiable. They wouldn't know if anyone knew how much they were, how loud they were cheering. In a tug of war, no one knows how hard I'm pressing or how hard the person behind me or how hard the person behind me. Our individual contributions are not identifiable. So social loafing is probably going to be really high. However, remember the example that I used of the realtor, the company that the person who owned the realtor thing, and you're adding the number of houses you sold plus the number of houses you sold plus the number of houses you sold. See how there the contributions are identifiable, the individual contributions. We know you sold more than you. We know you sold less than she did. When these individual contributions are identifiable, you get much less social loafing. So social loafing tends to happen when, if you are working less hard, no one knows it, not even you, maybe. Okay. Now, sometimes it's easy to make individual contributions identifiable. Sometimes it isn't. When it's not, what you could do is give very clear goals for individual performance. And sometimes that's possible. In a tug of war, it would be really hard to say, you need to make sure that you put at least X number of torque on this rope. I won't know if I'm actually having that much torque on the rope. Do you know what I mean? But when possible, if you have clear individual goals, that will reduce social loafing. And having clear group goals will reduce social loafing. And group goals can be really good, especially if the group is cohesive. If one person isn't meeting their goal and they're all cohesive and they believe that that person is trying their hardest, they're not loafing, the other group members might actually work extra hard to make up for what that person isn't doing. And so not only do you reduce social loafing, you get actually extra people are working extra hard to meet those group goals. And, all 3 of those things you could do potentially as a manager. Try to, look at the individual contributions and assess those, have clear goals for individual performance, and then see if they're meeting them, have clear goals for group performance, see if they're meeting those. But sometimes if you're a manager, you don't want to spend time on all that. You want to just give them a task and have them do it. And you don't want to be monitoring everything and assessing everything and evaluating everything all the time. People don't socially loaf on a task they love doing. If they find the task engaging, they're not going to socially loaf. There's a reason why no one's going to hire a robot to put their kid to bed at night. We want to be the ones reading our kid the story and rubbing their backs and, sharing so what happened today and all that kind of stuff. Tasks that are engaging to us that we love to do, we don't socially loaf on those. So a manager, if you're ever asked to manage people, one of the best things you can do to reduce social loafing is to try to match the person to the task that they like doing. So if you know they like doing this thing, have them do that. Have this person do a different part of the task that they like doing better. And try to some extent, get people doing the tasks they enjoy. That will reduce social loafing right there. Okay. All right, now we're gonna switch and look at group creativity. We're not really switching. We're just going to talk about another type of task. So one can see brainstorming as absolutely an additive task. When groups are asked to get together and be creative, and when they brainstorm, they're trying to come up with as many good ideas as they can. It's an additive task. The whole group is going to create as many ideas as this person did, plus this person, plus this person, plus this person. Then, of course, you have to get rid of the ideas that are replicated. But that's going to be how well the group did. Now, Osborne, way back in the 1950s, said that for people to brainstorm well, they should follow these 4 rules. They should try to generate as many ideas as they can. They should freewheel. In other words, come up with the craziest ideas you can. Don't hold back. The wilder, the better. They're told don't evaluate the ideas. Just say everything you think of. And lastly, spend some time combining ideas or working off of ideas that have been previously created. And Osborne thought that groups who followed these 4 rules would be 4 times more creative, come up with 4 times as many ideas as groups who did not follow these rules. And he's right, groups that follow these rules do better. But he also thought that they come up with more ideas than those that worked alone. And on that front, he's wrong. So if we use a pseudo group and we have 4 people brainstorm alone on a particular topic, then we write down, like let's say they were in a tape recorder, then we transcribe everything they said, we count the number of ideas, or we combine all of their input, we get rid of duplicate ideas, because if you were in a group, you wouldn't say an idea that someone else just said. So we get rid of the duplicate ideas, and we count the number of ideas they came up with. People who work alone come up with many more ideas than individuals. But what's interesting is if you ask people, how well did you do brainstorming? The people who worked alone are like, I did awful. I'm not good at this at all. You ask people, would you have done better had you been in a group? Oh, yes, much better if I'd been in a group. And then they ask people who worked in a group, how did you do? I did great. We came up with tons of ideas. So it's interesting. We have this thing where the groups aren't doing as well as the individuals, but they think they're doing much better than the individuals, and the individuals think they're doing much worse. So in the brainstorming literature, we try to ask what's going on? What are these production losses? So we're talking about what are the causes of productivity loss? There can be coordination problems, reduction of effort. What are some other issues that can happen? And in the brainstorming literature, it's clear that one thing that can happen is evaluation apprehension. That when you're in a group, you don't say every idea that comes to mind, even though the rule says freewheeling is welcome, the crazier the better, say everything you think of. You're afraid that if you say something really off the wall and stupid, that the other people in the group are going to think you're an idiot. And so people are afraid that they're going to say something goofy that won't be accepted by the group, so they don't say everything they think of. So that's why in a group, you may not be generating as many ideas as you are alone. Of course, social loafing that we talked about. Another piece that's like the sister of social loafing is called free riding. Free riding is the idea that when social loafing happens, people aren't working as hard. Well, once some people are not working as hard, I don't want to be someone who's working super hard when no one else is. Does that kind of make sense? If I'm the only one working hard and no one else is, I'm going to feel as though I've been taken advantage of. So once some people start to work not very hard, they stop working as hard, the other people are going to follow suit. They're going to what we call free ride, because no one wants to be the person who's doing all the work and being taken advantage of. So you've got social loafing, where people are putting in less effort because there's more people there to do the work. And then when people notice that some people aren't working that hard, they stop working as hard too, and they free ride. Also in the brainstorming literature, we found this thing called production blocking that very much is an example of this coordination loss. So pretend you're brainstorming. So one of the famous problems is we ask people, what would happen if after like starting 2005 or whatever the next year is? So I guess it would be 2006. Starting 2006, everyone's born with an extra finger on their hand. So everyone has two thumbs now instead of just one. What would change? What would be some advantages? What would be some disadvantages? And people say, oh, all the gloves would need to be remade, and it would be easier to catch a ball, and people that painted nails would make more money because now there's another thumb that they have to paint, and so on and so on. They come up with all these ideas. So if you're alone coming up with the ideas, you've got a tape recorder in front of you and you just start spitting them out. Like I just started talking, you just start listing them. But if you're in a group, you can't just start talking. You might be able to say one idea, but then someone else says an idea, and you have to be quiet while they're talking because you can't be talking over one another. Well, while they're talking, you're either going to be rehearsing your idea so you don't forget it. Well, that means that's taking away time to create new ideas. Or you are really listening to what they're saying, and then you forget the idea and it never gets said. So there's this sense of when you're in a group, you actually end up having this production loss. You kind of end up with less time to be able to present ideas you are thinking of, and less time producing new ideas as you're rehearsing ideas so you don't forget them. And that could be the reason why you end up with lower performance among groups versus people who are working alone. Another thing is the illusion of group productivity. Group members, like I talked about earlier, think they're doing really well, right? So in fact, if you ask group members if after they're done, so you might say, this group of 4 people, I want you to know you guys created 100 ideas. We went through and analyzed your stuff. You gave us 10 minutes. Thank you for chit-chatting among yourselves as we counted up your ideas. You guys came up with 100 ideas. I'm just making up 100 because it's easy to divide by 4. Then we asked the people, how many of those 100 ideas were yours? And we asked them how many, and on average, each person, when I average it, should be 25, right? But it's not. The average will be 50. Well, on average, they didn't each come up with 50, or there'd be 200 ideas, not 100. And no matter how many ideas it is, that's about the ratio. Where people inflate their productivity, they about 50%, they double it. Okay, they think that they're generating twice as many ideas as they're actually generating. Now, so we call this the illusion of group productivity. They think they're doing great. Why? It might be that you came up with an idea after I had an idea, and it's close to mine. So I take credit for your idea because I think you wouldn't have come up with your idea if it not been for my idea. But you're counting yourself as creating because you're the one who said it. So you can kind of see how some of the ideas more than one person might be kind of taking credit for. But like twice as many, though, it gets kind of funny to figure that out. And it might be that bias that we all think we're doing better than we are. You know, we've got those biases, self-serving biases, and so on. And the last idea is social matching. And the social matching idea has gotten a lot of evidence for it. All these have a lot of evidence for them. But the social matching is kind of interesting. It says that when you're in a group and people are generating ideas, we're all going to sort of match to the productivity of the other people in the group. So if someone's coming up with, about 5 ideas every, 2 minutes or something, then I'm probably going to come up with about 5 every 2 minutes also. Otherwise, I look like when I was trying to be the best pizza person, right? I look like I'm trying to show how great I am. And if I'm coming up with fewer than that, I look like I'm free riding, like I'm letting everyone else do the work. So when you look in groups that work face to face, there seems to be a real that everyone seems to come up with about the same number of ideas compared to people who are working alone, where there are huge individual differences in productivity. So that social matching idea, and there were some experiments done where you can put a confederate in there who's coming up with a whole bunch of ideas, and then the whole group tends to do better, or a confederate who comes up with very few, and the whole group tends to do worse. So the social matching idea really plays a role in at least group creativity, which again speaks to that you don't want to have a norm of low productivity. If that happens, it can really mess up your group. Okay. All right. Now we're going to switch topics. We've talked about, we've talked about additive tasks, and I've defined what compensatory tasks are, disjunctive tasks, conjunctive tasks, unitary tasks. Some research sees group decision-making as a type of task also. So where brainstorming is a type of additive task, group decision-making can be seen as a specific type of task. You might call it compensatory, depending upon how it's majority rules or something that it, so sometimes it's seen as a type of task. Other people say, no, it's a completely different group thing. It's not like tasks are apples and group decision making is a kind of apple. They say group performance and group decision making are two different things. So group performance is an apple, group decision making is an orange. And people argue this left and right. And personally, I just don't think it's worth the paper it's written on. I don't care what it is, just tell me how to be good at it. And so it is very clear that in our culture, we believe groups are really good decision makers, that groups will make better decisions than individuals. How do I know that? Because no important decision is ever made by one person. Surgeries are made in a group where you have the anesthesiologist, the doctor, the surgeon, and who else knows making that decision. We don't decide to go to war unless there's a whole panel of people that decide, yeah, we got to do this. Even at Cameron University, if I decided that it would be a good idea to add, we're sort of in the biopsychology revolution. Neuroscience is taking over everything within psychology. Shouldn't we make it where all of our undergraduate majors have to take biopsychology? Shouldn't we make biopsychology a required course? One might say. Right now it's an elective. Well, me alone, when I was chair of the department, I could not say, okay, that's how it should be and make it happen. The faculty had to decide, and then we made a recommendation, and that would go to curriculum committee, and that makes a recommendation to the dean, who makes a recommendation to the president, who makes a recommendation to the OU Board of Regents, who makes a recommendation to the whole state's Board of Regents, and then it would either get approved or disapproved. So we believe even like what should be, a requirement that should be added to people who have an undergraduate major in psychology at Cameron University, we believe that decision is best made in a group rather than by individuals. Is it true? It's hard to tell. But there are definitely some potential pitfalls that if groups are if you're going to have groups make the decision, you want to make sure that the groups avoid these potential pitfalls. And we're going to talk about 3 of them. Okay, so the first one is basically how risky or conservative decisions are. So there used to be, back when I was in school, well, actually it changed while I was in school. There was this idea that groups make more risky decisions than individuals. We called it the risky shift hypothesis. And the research that looked at this, what they would do is they'd give you a scenario, something like this. George works at City National Bank. He's been an employee there for 10 years. He really likes his job. He's good at it. The people like him. The people he works with, he likes. They even go bowling once a month together. That's how much he likes his coworkers and likes his job. However, he's always dreamed about being a DJ. And all of a sudden in Lawton Fort Sill, a new radio station is opening up. So he applies for the job and he gets it. He's going to be, if he accepts the job, a DJ, and it pays twice as much as his job at City National Bank. Should he take it? And they ask people alone, should he take it? And so on a 1 to 7 scale, 1, he should stay at City National Bank. 4, in between, I don't know. 7, he should definitely follow his dream and work at the radio station as a DJ. Okay. Most of the people, when you give them this scenario alone, they're going to be somewhere between 4.5 and 5.5. They sort of are on the side of he should, follow his dream and become a DJ. So alone, that's where they are as a decision maker. But then you have them get in groups of 4 or 5 or 10, however you want, and you have them discuss it. What do you think you should do? Well, I think you should do this. I think you should do that, blah, 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 blah. And they discuss it. 20 minutes, a half hour, an hour. The studies vary how long they spend and how many people are in the group. Then after they've had their group discussion, you have them go back alone again and you ask them, now what do you think? Again, on the scale of 1 to 7, what do you think? Does that make sense? And of course, we're going to have people do it alone so that we don't run into that problem with Ash's study of conformity, right? That we talked about in the last unit. So we're looking to see group decision making, the decision that you're going to make after being in a group, how it differs from individual decision making. And the research was clear that after you had this group discussion, most people are now between 6 and 7. They really are strong that he should follow his dreams. And so this was called the risky shift hypothesis. Groups make more risky decisions than individuals. But a graduate student wanted to look at this and said, you know what, when I look at all the scenarios, they're all set up where people start on the risky side and then they become more risky after the group discussion. I haven't really seen any research where they start where people are on the conservative side to see if they get more conservative. And the advisor said, they're not going to get more conservative. It's the risky shift hypothesis. They're going to get more risky. That doesn't make for a good dissertation. And the person was very adamant and said, yes, I want to do this. No one's tested it. I think we should. And so he convinced his advisor to do this. I think it was his dissertation. It might have been after his dissertation. But anyway, he changes the scenario. So rather than, I'm just going to give an example, rather than George always wanted to work as a DJ, instead, he always wanted to, like when MTV was brand new, you guys probably don't even know what MTV is. It was a TV channel that only played music videos. But he wanted to work on, he wanted to be on MTV playing guitar, but he doesn't really play guitar. He needs to learn to play guitar first. Well, people are like, I'm not so sure you should leave the bank and go and work in, move to LA and do the MTV when he doesn't even know how to play the thing yet. So the guitar yet. And so they'd be on the side between 3.5 and 3, thinking, 4 is the middle. They're on 3.5 to 3 going, we don't know that this is such a good idea when they're alone. Then they get in a group and talk, and they're way back down to 1 to 2, going, this is a terrible idea. He should absolutely stay at the bank and not follow his dream. Does that make sense? So they go from, I think he should stay at the bank, to I'm sure he should stay at the bank. And so what we find now, risky shift hypothesis is only half true. And what is true is the group polarization hypothesis. Groups make more extreme decisions than individuals. Okay, so if the group initially agrees with one another more or less, they'll become more extreme after they've had their time in a group. They'll become more conservative if they were initially conservative, more risky if they were initially risky. Does that kind of make sense? And I think you can think of lots of examples like this. You show up to an event where, I don't know, think of a political event. So the Democrats show up, and boy, by the time you leave the convention, you're like so Democrat, like whoa, whoa, whoa. Same thing with the Republicans. You start going, I'm a Republican, I'm going to show up. Then you leave going, Republicans, that's the only way to go. So whichever side you're on, you become more extreme on that side after being with that group. And your decision now is even more clear that you're going to vote Republican or vote Democrat. So we might ask why. Well, one theory, I'm kind of doing in a reverse order of how they're listed on the slide. One theory is the persuasive arguments theory. And it said that, and what it says is that you have, let's do George trying to work at the radio station, deciding whether he should work at the radio or stay at the bank. You might have the idea, I think he should work at the radio station because it pays twice as much as the bank. So this year he could, if he can just work there for 2 years, even if it doesn't work, he'll have as much money as if he worked at the bank for 4 years. So he can put half that money away and then have a couple years to not work at all. So this seems like a good idea. And that's why you're thinking, yeah, he should do it. But then when you get in the group and you start talking, there's one other person who says, it is so important to follow your dreams. There's all this research that shows that people that are doing jobs that they think are what they are like here on earth to do, and it's something that they've always wanted to do. They have much higher life satisfaction and yada, yada. And then you're like, wow, that's really that's another persuasive argument of why he should do this. And then another one gives you another good idea, and someone else speaks and you're like, whoa, where you used to have one good idea for why he should follow his dreams, now you have 4 or 5. And so you become more extreme in thinking this is a good idea because you hear more arguments in favor of what you already thought. The other idea or the other theory that accounts for this is social comparison theory. And we talked about social comparison theory when we were talking about the social influence chapter 6. With social comparison theory, when we're talking about group decision making, it's the idea that we all think we're slightly better than everyone else when we compare ourselves to other people. And in this case, to be better, it means that we're slightly stronger in our opinions in the correct direction. So if I think I should follow his dreams, I'm at a 5, but I think most everyone else will be at a 4.5 because I'm more right. I'm more right, meaning I'm feeling stronger in the correct direction. But when I listen to everyone in the group, they all seem to be at a 5 also. So now for me to be more correct, I got to move to be a 6. I need to move and become more extreme for me to be more correct than everyone else. And that's the social comparison theory idea. They might both be correct. There's evidence for both. But it's very, very clear that that groups make more extreme decisions than individuals. Okay, another potential pitfall that we have in group decision making is telling what you know. And I'm going to just make a very quick little graph here. Okay, one reason why we think it's a good idea to have people make decisions in groups is because we think that we'll get much more information if we have more people talking about the decision that they're going to make. So for example, let's say we're talking about should we add a course to the undergraduate program? Well, we might want to have a full-time faculty member, this circle here. This person, this is all the information they have. But rather than having them make that decision alone, let's have them talk to an alumnus, someone who works in the community doing psychology. This is the amount of information they have. There's some overlap. And then this might be a current student who's in the program now and all the information they have. If we can have the 3 of us make this decision together, then instead of having just this one circle piece of information, we're going to have all of this information, much more information than we would if we were alone. Does that kind of make sense? And Of course, when we're looking at decision making, we're going to have more than just 3 people oftentimes, and the circles are a lot bigger. But the idea is that when people get together to make a decision, they're going to talk about the information that only they have, that the other group members don't have, which is going to give more information to be discussed, and we're going to make better decisions because we've got more information that we're looking at. But unfortunately, when Stacer, Titus, and Hannah went to look at this 30 years ago, they found that's not what's true at all. In fact, instead of talking about the wider piece of information and focus on the pieces of information that we don't share, instead, almost all of the group discussion focuses on the piece of information that all the group members have in common. We tend to talk about what everyone already knows rather than talking about our unique pieces of information. And that is a real problem. And I'm not going to go into Stacer, Titus, and Hannah's study. You can look at that on your own time if you want, but it is, but it's very true. They've shown it in a whole bunch of different scenarios, and that sometimes or oftentimes when people get together, they sort of find what they have in common, and then they spend most of their time talking about that information. And that's going to really make it where a group could end up making a terrible decision, a worse decision compared to an individual. Why does this happen? Well, because this is what socially skilled people do, right? When you train your kid to get along with other people, you train them to ask questions, you find what everyone in the group has in common, and that's what you talk about, right? So why would they not do this when they're when they're in a group making a decision? So if I join a group, a social group, and I meet people and I ask someone, have you seen the such and such movie? If everyone says no, I don't go on a big long discussion about the movie. I find a movie we've all seen, and then we talk about that movie. So what we do socially is what we tend to do when we're doing group decision making. One way to get rid of this is to tell the group about it. If you start out a group and you go, there's research that shows that when people do group decision making, especially when they're brought together for their unique pieces of information, their unique perspective, their vantage points, rather than sharing the information that only they have, they tend to spend most of the time talking about the information they all have in common. So let's make sure that our group doesn't fall into that pitfall. Let's make sure our group, each of us really thinks about what do the other people who are here not know that only I know, and I want to make sure that I share that with you guys. And if each of us does that, we're much more likely to come up with a better decision. Okay, so that's telling what you know. A third problem, and this is a big one, is called groupthink. And groupthink is this phenomenon that sometimes a group is so groupy and so into being a groupy group where everyone gets along that becomes more important than making a really good decision. And we've got some examples, real world examples of terrible things that have gone wrong that when they look back, they think groupthink happened in that group. So one was the Challenger shuttle that went up into space. I think they were going to the moon and had a teacher on board as an astronaut as well as some other astronauts. And like, I think she was from Oklahoma. She might have been from Massachusetts, but I think she was a first grade teacher or a third grade teacher. And so they had first and third graders watching throughout the United States because look, this is a teacher, just like she's one of us. And she went through some additional training. And now look, she's going to go to the moon. How exciting. And all of these kids watched the rocket blow apart midair and they all died. And this was a tragedy. I mean, there are lots of tragedies, but this was very tragic that all these people died. And when they went back to go, what happened? And they looked at the groups, the group decisions, the groups that made the decision to launch it that day. They really think groupthink played a role. There had been weather issues for many, many days, so the launch kept not taking off. They had to keep postponing it for various weather things. But the day that it was taking off, it was very cold, I believe, and people knew that a washer, something that looked like a washer that was in there, would not work well if the temperature went below a certain amount. And that day it was supposed to be that cold, and it was that cold, and it didn't work. And that was part of the reason why it blew up. And why was that not brought up the morning when they were making the decision, should we have this rocket go today? And there were a couple people who made sure that the engineers who knew that were not invited to have a seat at the table that day. And those people that protect the group from information that's inconsistent with where the group seems to be going, we call them mind guards. And so let's start talking about all of these symptoms of groupthink. And one symptom of groupthink is the members of the group have this illusion that the group will never make a bad decision. They're invulnerable. We are an amazing group of experts. We're rocket scientists, right? We're an amazing group of experts. We're incredible. We're moral. We're amazing. And we can't make a bad decision. So you've got this illusion of invulnerability, this unquestioned belief in the group's morality. We are moral people. We're going to do the right thing. God is on our side. Things are going to go well. There's conformity pressure. The group is set up because everyone gets along so well, and we're all experts, and we all know what we're doing, and we all feel so great about each other that there's pressure not to go against what some of the people in the group are saying. And so once you've got this pressure to conform and agree with what other people are saying, then you're not going to say everything you think of. So you're going to have some of this self-censorship where people are not saying everything that comes to mind. And because people aren't saying everything that comes to mind, now you're going to end up with this illusion that everyone agrees. So then any doubts that do come to mind, you're like, I'm the only one thinking this. I mean, everyone else seems to be agreeing. I'm all alone here. So even more reason why you're going to self-censor and not say it. You have this there's going to be a couple people that are going to play the role of protecting the group from information that's inconsistent from the decision that seems to be made. Now, in fact, they're not protecting the group at all, but they sort of play this role of, we want to get this through. And to get it through, we got to keep those naysayers away. Also, in groups that are suffering from groupthink, there's lots of rationalization to defend and justify prior decisions that ended up not being so well. And if there's an opponent, there'll be a stereotype view of the opponent, usually as being weak and stupid. Another real world thing, there's a book called Fiasco that looks at the whole, how when we invaded Iraq. And I'm not saying whether that was a good thing or a bad thing. I have a brother-in-law who was in the military there, and he's very happy he was there. And even though it meant that he wasn't around all of his children or his wife for a whole year, and spent a lot of time sleeping in ditches from time to time, and was absolutely in harm's way, he strongly believes that we needed to be there, and we did great things while we were there. But on another hand, the goal of going there was to find and destroy weapons of mass destruction that were never found, and some other things. So the book Fiasco kind of makes it sound as though the goals were not met. How did that happen? And when you read the book Fiasco, clearly some of the teams that were making the decision, some of the groups that were making the decision to go there, were suffering from groupthink. They had this illusion of invulnerability, this unquestioned belief in the group's morality, definite conformity pressure with this illusion that everyone agrees, absolute mind guarding, and definitely a stereotype view of the opponent that Saddam Hussein was like delusional. So what can we do to get rid of groupthink? how can we avoid it? Well, one thing you can do is just tell people about it. Because you've had this course and you've learned about groupthink, you are now less likely to be in a group that has groupthink. Because when you're sitting in a group and you start to censor yourself and you feel that conformity pressure, you're going to go, I remember learning about this in my advanced social psychology class. This is not a good sign. We're at risk now for making a really bad decision. Let's really stop with this conformity pressure. Does that kind of make sense? And you might say something, I like all you guys a whole bunch, but I'm a little bit nervous that we're going to end up in this thing called groupthink, where everyone wants to get along more than making a great decision. This decision we're about to make is really important and we can't mess up. And so you knowing about groupthink, telling the group members about groupthink will actually make groupthink less likely to happen. Another good thing is the leader can remain impartial and not endorse any position. In fact, I am not going to go through these. I want you to read these. They all explain what they are. You don't need me to read them to you. But if a leader up front says, this is what I think, now let's talk about it. Well, if that leader is in charge of whether you get promoted, whether or not you're going to get a raise, and a myriad of other things, you're unlikely to disagree with the leader. So obviously it's best for the leader to remain impartial and not endorse a position until maybe after everyone has spoken, then they might be able to say something. And you can read this list of other things that you can do that will make the group feel a little bit less groupy and make sure that a whole bunch of different ideas are really discussed and that there isn't this conformity pressure to just agree with the decision that's on the table at the moment. Okay. Okay, now we're going to switch. So we've talked about group decision making and 3 potential pitfalls that can happen. Now let's talk about teams. So in social psychology, we talk about groups, working groups, and decision making. But in the business, like if you were taking a business class, they talk about teams. Well, if you look at what teams are and what groups are, they overlap a lot. So I for one, am very happy that in the last 10 years, the social psychology people, when they're talking about groups, they start talking about teams also. I think this is really important. So when you look at the team literature, look at how similar the definition of a team is to what we talk about a group. 2 or more individuals, they socially interact, they have common goals, they're interdependent. Now, some of the differences are they're brought together to perform an organizationally relevant task. Another difference is they have different roles and responsibilities. Now, in a group, that may occur, but it doesn't have to. And they're together embedded in an encompassing organizational system with boundaries and linkages to the broader system, context, and task environment. And most groups are too, although it might not be to an organization, but it's maybe to their family or their community or so on and so on. So some types of teams, there are management teams, project teams that have really been studied. And when we look at team performance, rather than calling it performance, they call it effectiveness, because maybe what they're trying to perform isn't an actual thing you can look at. Maybe what they're doing is trying to make it where their customer is satisfied. Well, even that's something you can look at. I'm having a hard time coming up with a good performance outcome that's not performance-based right now, but there are examples. And so in the team literature, they talk a lot about the IPO model. I stands for inputs, P stands for processes, and O stands for outputs. So inputs these are like characteristics of the team, how the team is put together, the personality of the team members, the knowledge, skills, and abilities of the team members. This is sort of like aspects of the group that all exist. Processes are what the team actually does when they get together. The group dynamics, cooperation, competition, negotiation. And the outputs are what the actual team creates. So the performance that could be judged by others or the team themselves. how good the team members feel about themselves and about the team members, the other team members, and how much they want to stay in the team, viability. And so most of team effectiveness uses this IPO model, and I want you to be familiar with it. Should organizations rely on teams to enhance productivity, or would it be better to have individuals work alone? The thing with teams is most organizations, you can't have a person work alone. Most of the time, the task that needs to be done, it's not possible to have an individual do it. You have to have a team do it. So you have to really rely on teams to enhance your productivity. And you can do some team building. So you design teams so they're the right size to get the project done that you want done. That they are able to communicate with each other the appropriate amount of time, that the authority structure is set up appropriately, that the organization of the team is set up appropriately, the team is given enough time to do the task, and that the composition of the team, in other words, do you have the right people on the team, the right skill set on the team to get the job done. And then once you have the right people in there, you need to make sure that the goals are very clear and the roles that people are playing are really clear. Under our process variables, you want to make sure that you give the people really good training. So you give them good orientation, you distribute the resources really well, you make sure they're staying on track, you're pacing it well, you make sure they're coordinating with one another well, that all the group members stay motivated. You want to make sure that you have really good processes, that procedures and processes that are there that enhance productivity, and you want to build cohesion a number of ways, because remember, those cohesive groups do better and productive groups become more cohesive, and that's going to work at the team level also. So there's lots of different team approaches that we can do to increase team effectiveness and team satisfaction. Here's one that was created by Kozlowski and Ilgen that's very popular. It's old now, but this is used a lot, a framework to look at it in a lot of the research, where we'll look at factors that shape and leverage or align the processes will affect the team processes that emerge, and that ends up affecting team effectiveness, which then affects the whole organization. It affects the environment that the organization's working in and the team itself, which then all affects the team and the team task, which affects the team processes that are affected by the factors that shape our life. And it just goes round and round and round. So it's kind of a neat way to look at how all these different factors play a role in whether or not a team's going to do well. So let's look at some of these factors that shape, leverage, or align the processes. The team cognitive processes and structures, like the team climate. Is the team culture set up where everyone's supposed to produce as much as they can and get along with one another as much as they can, but not get along so much that you end up with groupthink, but get along enough where you feel it's okay to have some conflict, but you manage conflict well. Does that kind of make sense? So the culture of the team helps for conflict to go well. You've got some mental models of how and transactive memory, mental models of how the task needs to be done. Does every member on the team know how to accomplish the tasks that need to be accomplished? Do they all share a mental model, an idea of how to accomplish this task? And when one member leaves, how is the next member, a brand new member, how is that mental model transferred, that memory given to the new member? How much do the members overlap in their mental model? That's really important, and the skills that they have to do. So if one person doesn't show up one day, can other people zoom in and do it or not? How did the team learn together, not as an individual, but how did they learn together to do the task effectively? Those are some of the cognitive processes and structures that are there. There's also some interpersonal, motivational, and affective processes that play a role, like what are the emotions of the team? So is the team all negative and down and they're always like, oh, organization sucks. We're a great team, but this organization's awful and blah. Or is the team affect really positive? We love our jobs and we feel honored to work here and we're doing great things that are important for the world. How does the team manage conflict? How cohesive are they? And we can look at team action and the behavioral processes like coordination and cooperation and communication. Team regulation. How does the team regulate itself emotionally and at getting the task done? How do they look at, boy, we're doing really well. Let's take a break now and celebrate, or we're doing really well. Let's see if we can even get more done and go further than our goals. How does the team adapt as things change? You can see all of the different factors that affect team effectiveness. And that was just this piece that ends up affecting the team processes that affect team effectiveness, that affect the organizational system in which the team is in, that affects the tasks that they're given, that affects the team. So you can just see how complex and complicated this is. Now, your textbook also talks about networks, and I don't want to spend too much time this. In fact, we're going to end with this, but I did want to bring up what some of the networks are. So we've got some status networks. These are stable patterns of variations that the members have in authority and power. And remember, authority is the power that a person has because the organization gave you that title, says that you have that power. Power can either be authority because the organization gave it to you, or power because you know a lot, because you are a hub of communication, people go through you, because for whatever reason, people like you. Who knows why you have the power that you have, but there is some members in the group will have more status than others. They have more authority, they have more power. And so in this status network, researchers went in, this is just an example of one. Researchers can go in and try to figure out who has more status in a network. And in this one, it looks as though person number 19 and person number 30 have a lot of status. So if you were made a leader of this group, or you were coming and looking at this group, what you'd want to do is first figure out, what does the status network look like? And once you know this now, if you want to push through an idea you have, you know that you need to convince person number 19 and person number 30 that your idea is a good idea. And if they get on board and they like your idea, they're probably going to be able to convince the rest of the group that you have a good idea. Not so much the 7, 16, and 11, but look at all of the other people, not 28 or 29 either. But you're going to get almost everyone else in the group, in the team, if you can get 19 and 30 on board. So this is a status network. There's also status. What are status networks? They're perceptions of status that people pretty much agree with. And there's obviously competition for status. In most teams, there's going to be a pecking order, and there's one that the organization lays on there, but then there's one that really just from the ground up starts to exist. And so and that status network really plays a role in how easy it is to get things done. If people who have high status in the network want to not allow a particular process to happen, probably they'll be able to ditch it. And it will be hard to get that team on board if you don't get these high status people on board. Okay. There are also attraction networks. These are stable patterns of who likes who and who doesn't like who. And sometimes the way to get someone to like you is to share that you both dislike someone else. And so again, if you're a leader or who's coming in and or a manager who's coming in, you want to find out what these attraction networks look like, because it may be that if one group or certain members see that you seem to be buddy and getting along really well with, I don't know, a particular member who's not, who there's a whole group of people that don't like that person, then that might mean that you just alienated this whole group by seeming to get along so well with this person. So before you seem nice to anyone in particular, you want to really figure out what that attraction network looks like. Okay. And some people, what is an attraction network? Well, some members are stars, everyone likes them, some are rejected, some they don't really play a role. But it's not that people don't like them, but people do like them. And there's a whole bunch of different reasons why that might be. But Hyder's balance theory is just this idea that we like people who, we either like it when everyone likes who we like, that works. But we also like it if people share in our dislike for someone. But you'll be out of balance if like A and B both like person D, but C doesn't like D. Well, then that's going to put the whole thing off balance. C has to begin to like D, or A and B have to begin to dislike D in order for them to go back into balance. Okay. So, having socially attractive qualities and a good person to group fit helps you to be an attractive member in the attraction networks. But again, if you're going in to manage a team, you want to know what those status networks like. You want to know what these attraction networks like. And communication networks, in my opinion, are even more important. These are formal and informal paths that define who speaks to who speaks to whom, and like most frequently and about like really important topics. And these are really important. You might have authority over a group, but if group members aren't telling you what's going on, or you're not communicating with a group member that everyone else is telling what's going on, then you're going to be missing key information that may lead you to make a bad decision. And then you play a role in the people that you're giving information to in the system above you that your team is in, and it can really change everything. And so you need to have it in your communication network, really good ideas of what's happening above you so that you know which of these ideas that's coming up from the people that you're supervising, this group will approve. There's no reason to waste time. If you know this group will never approve this happening, you want to let these people know this as quickly as possible so they don't waste time working on that output. So you can see how these communication networks are really important. And your book goes through some time talking about different kinds of communication networks. So they can be centralized versus uncentralized. So in a 3-person network, you can see how the pinwheel is very uncentralized. This person's talking to this person, who's talking to this person, who's talking to this person. Everyone's talking to this person talks to this person only talks to this person only talks to this person. In the ComCon, everyone's talking to each other. This is your most uncentralized one. This is somewhat uncentralized. This is your most centralized one, where this person only talks to this person and this person only talks to this person. They're not talking to each other at all. This person gives this person their information and this person their information. So this is your most centralized, this is your most uncentralized, and this is sort of like, this is pretty uncentralized also. So you've got these 3-person networks. If it goes to 4 people, they give them different names: the wheel, the kite, the circle, the ComCom. Everyone's talking to everyone. You've got 5-person networks and what they can start looking like. So these communication networks are really important. because people can only make good decisions if they have access to the information that they need to make the good decision. But you can't give everyone all the information, or there'll be an information overload. You just need to give them the right information, but who decides what's right? So you can see how important it is to think through the policies and procedures and the communication networks that are formally developed, and then let the informal ones create as they do, and then see how much of the informal ones are benefiting the organization or harming the organization. If they're benefiting the organization, make them formal. And if they're not benefiting the organization, what can you do to get rid of the informal ones? So centralized networks are most efficient unless there's just too much information. Individuals who occupy more central positions are more influential and usually more satisfied than those located more at the periphery. And hierarchical networks and information flow, more information flows downward, and unrealistically positive information tends to flow upward. So if you know, given that we know that, if you're up high, you know that when the people come up and say, oh, it's going to be great, we can do this in this amount of time, you might go, it's going to take twice as long to do that. And so that you're adjusting, knowing that when the information flows upward, it's likely to be unrealistically positive based on the research. So the book gives you a feel for these different kinds of communication networks and attraction networks and status networks. And all that I really want you to know about this is that there are at least 3 different types of networks, and basically how complex these teams are within an organization. And then that organization is within, like, if your organization is a bank, then you're within an entire banking system, banking at your state level, banking at the federal level, banking at a global level. And so these teams are in structures that are affected by bigger structures and bigger structures and bigger structures. And I really want you to have the idea, or I hope I communicated how complicated these systems are and how many moving parts there are and how difficult it is to design something that's going to be as efficient as possible, but how you want to give it lots of thought to create a team that's going to be as efficient as possible. Okay, we are now finished with chapter 10. I know it took 2 videos, but we're done with chapter 10. And next week, we will be talking about chapter 7, liking and loving. All right, see you next week.